Well, one of the main aspects is when you're building a team around a farm family or any family-owned business is you're working with the group of specialists. You're working with their team of advisors. And my goal has always been to establish really what the family's goals and objectives are and find out what's important and what family members are involved or not involved and really what their mission is. And at that point in time, once you can get the initial foundation laid out of what their goals and objectives are and understanding what they're trying to accomplish, you figure out what members of the team need to be brought to the table and need to be involved. And, more likely than not, it's, an attorney that needs to be brought to the table. And so we, at that point in time is when, we reach out to somebody like Dan Waters and bring him on to the team and say, okay, let's help this family in the planning process and accomplishing what their goals and objectives are.
The reality of it is this sort of planning, the planning that we do, it cannot be done in a silo. It just cannot. I mean, there's just way too many moving parts to the client, both legal, accounting, financial planning, asset protection, liquidity planning, all sorts of disciplines involved. And if any particular advisor tried to do it in a silo, you'd be missing out and the client would be missing out on key critical advice to complete that plan.
Well, a lot of the times I'll initially go out and meet with that family and try to understand really what the dynamics of the family are, which family members are involved in the business, which ones aren't involved in the business, gain a little bit of a historical perspective on how they got to where they are today, and try to understand what work they've done up to this point in time. And then as part of that process, we go through the aspect of gathering, whether it's, their existing estate planning documents, whether it's existing, balance sheets, profit and loss, tax returns, existing financial planning documents, whether that's in insurance statements, investment statements, and really start coordinating, with their accountant, with an attorney, or bringing an accountant or attorney to the table to help work with the family to really start, and analyzing what their goals and objectives are and what tools are going to be put in place help them accomplish that. To Dan's point, we can't work in a silo. We're specialists within our own arena. And so to help the families that we work with most often is you're bringing those team of specialists to them and that they're specialists in their area and that they work together as a team.
A lot of times when Brandon and I work together, Brandon has had a preliminary meeting where he's listened to what the client is saying and prioritizing and has gotten permission from the client to share some of that with me. And what that allows us to do is really come in and hit the ground running and have a positive, productive initial meeting with that client to not only start talking about what's important, but what are the options that we have to try and address it.
When we look at, where we bring people together, one of the benefits to our clients is they're not involved in every conversation. And the nice aspect is that, we'll have our client sign an authorization to allow us to work with their other team members, their other professionals, so we can kind of work behind the scenes. So we're not interrupting their day-to-day operations, and we're taking time away from their operations, which allows, the accountant, the attorney, and us to collaborate together and really think proactively on behalf of our clients on what should they be doing and what transition or succession or business continuity plan should this look like to help them accomplish their goals and objectives.
When we get involved, it's very common for us to work very closely with the advisor team that's in place in lieu of bothering the client for what would seem like mundane requests for financial records and copies of deeds and those sorts of things. We can pull those together, leave the client out of it, strategize really behind the client's back, but in a good way, so that when we do get together with the client, we're making the most productive use of our time. Every client is different, and some clients are very hands-on when it comes to their planning. Other clients are a little more hands-off, where they basically express their opinions and let us run with it. And we work with both. But when we have the ability to work behind the client's back, but in a good way, it really can make an efficient and productive process. I've worked with Brandon a long time, and I know Brandon and kind of how he thinks. And one of the nice things about that is we think very similarly. So it's very, very common that we approach a scenario through the same lens, to try and achieve the same result with the same tools. That being said, that's not always the case. But Brandon and I are strong enough professionally to challenge one another. And I always say, I want to be challenged. Poke holes in whatever I am proposing. And Brandon's the same way. Here's what I'm thinking, or here's what I'm seeing. What do you think about that? And it really leads to a productive, positive conversation for the client when we're going back and forth and challenging one another on the tools or the process that we're going through with the client.
Now, and I think that's some of the aspects when you're working with some of these family-owned businesses, when you talk about, what's sweat equity worth? What's fair? Because to a lot of our farm families, when they're looking at this, fair isn't always equal and equal isn't always fair. And that gets into an emotional type. And so when you're working, whether it's what, Mr. Waters is the attorney or their CPA, you're trying to figure out more some of those emotional aspects where it's not just in the math, it's not just in the numbers. And so when we're trying to brainstorm, just like we were last night with the client, really trying to include that non-active farm child and what's fair.
Yep.
And there's different aspects and ways to look at that. And it's not just in the legal, it's not just in the accounting, but it's in the brainstorm between the professionals and saying, how do we best structure some of these plan techniques and designs to make it fair? And, those aspects always become interesting between professionals and trying to elaborate and brainstorm on behalf of the client.
What I have found is, and I think you too, Brandon, is clients want your expertise. They want my expertise. They want to know that their trust is good and that their financial plan and insurance portfolio is in order. But what they really want is advice.
Yeah.
And so you got to have enough courage to give advice that you feel strongly about. And sometimes that means you're sticking your neck out there a little bit, but you got to do it. And I think one of the worst things that we can do as professionals is be an order taker, where they tell you what they want, and you just crank it out.
Yeah.
That's not what most clients really want or what they really need.
Well, you can look at the patriarch and matriarch and how mom and dad had different visions of what they wanted that to look like and different visions of what's fair.
Yep.
And we were both sitting there at the table challenging them. Well, have you thought about this? Well, what if it looked this way? Here's the pros, here's the cons.
Right.
And, to your point, you never be an order taker. You challenge them to think of long range. How is this going to affect the transition of the operation?